All right, gang, I'm so excited for this interview. Okay, today we are talking to my friend and best-selling author, William Paul Young. Paul is many things: a dad, a grandfather, a husband, a writer, a poet, a teacher, so many things. I'd also say that he's a person that understands grace and peace more than just about anybody that I've ever met. He's written a number of best-selling books, Lies We Believe About God, Eve, and Crossroads, all amazing reads. But one book in particular has become what some would call a phenomenon. And I don't throw that word around lightly, partly because it's hard to spell, but also because when you say phenomenon, it means it's rare, it's almost unexplained. And this book is all of that. I'm talking about The Shack. There's a very good chance that you've heard of it. There's a very good chance you've read it because over 23 million copies of the book are in print. It's been translated into over 50 languages. It was just recently made into a movie. Incredible. When Paul wrote the book, though, he wasn't a successful author. He wasn't sitting on a big advance. In fact, he was working 3 jobs and barely making ends meet. Heck, he wasn't even thinking about writing a book. It was simply trying to create a gift for his kids. But out of all of that came this international bestseller. It's an incredible story. It's made a huge impact on me personally. And based on the feedback from all of you, I've heard from so many of you that has made a huge impact on you too. So we're going to talk about this journey of writing it, some of the things he's learned along the way, and what he's up to next. So let's get to this. Paul, welcome to Dream, Think, Do, buddy.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. It's about time.
It is about time. It's funny because before I hit record, we were talking about that the last time we officially did an interview was before the Dream Think Do podcast even existed, which means it was over 4 or 5 years ago, which is nuts.
Yeah, you've grown up.
I know, right? All grows up. I got a lot more gray on the old goatee, I'll tell you, my friend, since the last time. Sheesh. So, and things are good?
Things are good. We've got 12 grandbabies who are 11 years old and under, and 9 of them are within 15 minutes. So
that's an aerobic perk. You don't need a gym membership, my man. You got the grandkids plan.
No kidding. And it's the best. It's the best. I love being a grandfather.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. So what's going to be fun about this interview is I put this out. A lot of times if I've got somebody that I think, Dream Think Do listeners are really going to be interested in, I put it out to them to say, hey, what questions would you ask? And we got more questions for you than I probably have had for any other guest, which is so cool. Some of them are so fun, so profound, all of that deep. So we're gonna go after those as I pepper in some of mine, because it's my show. I get to make the call, right? I get to have some of my questions too. All right. So let's go back to I alluded to the creation of the Shack, but I want to get into some of your earlier history as well. But let's go back to how this thing started, because, for Dream Think Doers, so many people are working on a dream, or maybe they're in a place where they're like, I don't know that I even have a dream. And I don't think that you would have said a book was your dream as you were writing.
Not at all.
The Shack.
Not at all.
So, yeah. So Jody Saunders and Alicia Ungs both asked big questions about, okay, what was the initial inspiration of writing the book? How did the idea begin? So let's start there.
I was trying to do like the Bible says and submit to my wife.
Good word. You married up, Kim. You married up. So yeah, if Kim says, you do, right?
Yeah.
Her question wasn't, Paul, write a book. What was her question?
It wasn't. It was someday. This is almost verbatim. She said it over about 4 years. I just didn't feel ready until the year I turned 50. But she said, someday as a gift for our children, would you please write something that puts in one place how you think, because you think outside the box.
Yeah.
And I've written all my life, but in the early days, it was just trying to get the inside world out. And I destroyed most of that. It was pretty dark stuff. And then over time, I started writing poetry and songs and short stories for friends. But she had said, someday. And really, I'm thinking like, okay, how do I want to write sort of a legacy piece, for my kids for Christmas? And I just didn't feel ready until the year I turned 50. So when I wrote it, I was trying to say, here's my story, but I'm putting it in fiction because at least that's accessible to you.
Yeah.
And won't bore you to death with some theological thing,
Right.
And it's Kim later said, by the way, that after the book was put into mass print, she said, you know, when I asked you to do this, I was thinking 4 to 6 pages. And by the way, men marry up. You know, it's because we don't have a lot of choice.
Exactly right. So yeah, so you started writing this, but you were, if I remember right, you were working 3 different jobs. It wasn't
Yep.
like you were just, you know, a man of ease and international mystery. You were like writing this on the train going to work, right?
Yeah. So yes, I was working 3 jobs, grunt jobs, hard work jobs.
Yeah.
And but I had 40 minutes on the train, and I had nothing to give the kids for Christmas that year.
Wow.
And so, and, you know, and I never dreamed to be a published author. That wasn't in fact, when I finished this and made the 15 copies at Office Depot, it did everything I ever wanted it to do. It never even crossed my mind one time to publish it, because I don't know anything about publishing.
Yeah.
That's just a different world to me. And so I had no intentions to publish it either. It just, you make 15 copies and you give it to your kids, and they go, "Oh, a book. Thanks, Dad." We'll get right on that.
Yeah, right. Well, that was one question, because I know that story, but I one of the things I realized I never asked you was, yeah, what was that Christmas like? I mean, did you sit down and read it? I know what my teenage boys would be like. Okay, Dad, right?
Yeah, no, it took them a while. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
My friends read it before my kids read it, and then,
Yeah.
but 2 things are important.
Yeah.
One is 15 copies did everything I ever wanted that book to do.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah. And that's still true to this day. All this other smoke and mirrors,
Yeah.
wonderment, you know, proof that God can still speak through Balaam's ass, you know, that it all goes back to 15 copies did everything I ever wanted it to do. And the other thing that I always say is that everything that mattered to me was in place before I wrote the book. So identity, worth, value, significance, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, community, love, all in place before I wrote the book. So the book never added any of those things to me.
Wow.
What it did is, and this is a gift that is too beautiful for words.
Yeah.
But it gave me an invitation to walk on the holy ground of other people's stories. It just blew the doors open so that people could talk about their own stories.
Yeah.
And so I've had the privilege of being inside some of the most amazing stories on the planet, and some of the greatest losses.
Sure.
Some of the greatest things that are so difficult. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, not
well,
intended
that's
whatsoever.
from people coming up and telling you how the book had impacted them, or when they read it, or any of those things. I know for me, I think I've told you, but it's like I was coming back. I'd been speaking for weeks. I was dry. I was tired. I was not in that place of everything was taken care of, you know, like I was far from that. And God gave me this nudge to grab it in an airport bookstore. And I did not want to read it, because one of my friends had warned me about the first couple of chapters, and I'm a dad, and I'm like, I don't know that I can make it through what I'm hearing the stories about. I don't want to. And God's like, read it. And I bawled my stinking eyes out on this plane, just ugly cry. And then I'm supposed to have meetings lined up. I'm supposed to land, and I'm supposed to have meetings lined up the rest of the day. I get off that plane, and all of my meetings are canceled for that day. I wound up reading through the whole book.
Wow.
It life changing. I've probably read it 6 more times. It's amazing. So
when I was in the fall of 2007, because we put it in print May of 2007, and our goal was to get through 10,000 copies in 2 years and work our way up to 100,000. And so the guys,
which would be amazing, right?
And and that Hollywood will talk to you if you can sell a novel 100,000 copies. 7,500 is a bestseller.
Yeah.
And so that fall, we're in the little house on the corner of 12th Street, and I'm still working my 3 jobs. I didn't quit my 3 jobs till February of 2008. And just in case, you know.
Exactly. I smell something good, but I'm not leaving these. Yeah.
No, I've seen the other shoe drop before.
Yeah, right.
But in the fall, I had an experience that I've never had before and never had since. And And I sleep well at night, and I'm laying in bed. And at about 2:30 in the morning, I wake up. I mean, just like
Huh.
somebody had just shaken me up. And I actually sit up in bed, and Kim is sound asleep next to me. And it's as close to a visual vision.
Yeah.
I get pictures and visuals and things like
Right.
that in my imagination, but this is as close as I've ever had to something in front of me. And it was a waterfall of creative ideas,
Wow.
one after another, each lasting for about 5 minutes. So I just sit there and watch, and then it would be this incredible idea, and then the next one would start, and it would be an incredible idea, and then the next one would start. And about, I don't know why it took this long, but about 25 minutes into this,
Wow.
I think, I need to write this down,
This is
right?
really good.
And instantly the waterfall stops.
Huh.
And there's this dead silence. And then I hear the voice inside, and I've hung around God long enough to know that he knows how to speak my language.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is what God says to me: Paul, that's just like the way you've been. You don't trust that this is a river. So you want to dam it up, and then you want to put this water into little jars and sell it in exchange for identity and worth and value and significance and security and meaning and purpose and destiny and community and love. And it crushed me. I'm bawling, right? Like, I'm so exposed. I'm so called out, And I said, I will never do that again.
Huh.
And I haven't. And so anytime that I'm working on not just overtly creative things, but just in life, I constantly go, this is a river. This is a river. I don't have to dam it up. I don't have to own it. I don't have to sequester it off, because my identity already is there. My worth, my value, my significance, right? My significance is who I am. It's not what I do. It's not a book that I wrote.
Right.
And so, and let me attach another piece to this to frame it, because it's not like you resolve that kind of a big issue in your world and then it just goes away and you never have to deal with it again.
Never to touch it again. Right.
Right. No, I'm totally healed. Right. So
exactly. I'm good.
So, a few years later, because of a whole confluence of situations, I had to do, I had a contract to write a second novel. Like, I'm like, you want me to write a book on purpose?
Yeah.
Not like on purpose, but like intentionally.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's a new idea. And then I go like,
people do this?
they said, well, you have till next year. You have till August 6th of next year.
Wow.
I'm going like, okay. I don't even have a title or anything,
Exactly.
And I was good. I was real good until about 6 weeks later, I get a phone call from New York and they go, Paul, great news. Congratulations. 7 languages have already bought your next novel. And I'm like, did you explain to them that I have no idea what I'm doing?
I don't even know the title yet.
They said, oh yeah, no problem. You have till next August. And then for about 20 minutes, I freak out, because then you start all the future tripping stuff. You start creating imaginations, and it's like, what if?
Right.
The sign of future tripping. What if?
Yeah.
And about 20 minutes into this, and suddenly I go, wait a minute. What am I talking about? I never asked for any of this to begin with.
Yeah.
This was all part of an unfolding, living in the grace of one day kind of experience. And why would I think I'm in charge now of my identity and worth and value and significance? And so my prayer was, so Papa, if August 6th shows up and I don't have one word on one page, and I completely fall on my face in front of the publishing expectations and the readership, I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in. Yeah, if that's how it unfolds, you have to have purpose in that. So I'm in. And it totally released me from all the sense of expectation and the responsibility to try to accomplish all this. And I just stopped thinking about it. So I went to I was on some international stuff, went to Korea, got back. Somebody called me and said, you know, we've got this place down at Depot Bay. And while I was in Korea, I was thinking about this idea for just a possible written something.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out the details of it. And then this place comes open. So I went down there for 11 days and wrote 40,000 words of a 80,000 word novel called Crossroads.
Right.
And which is Kim's favorite of anything I've ever written.
I love that book. I love that book.
And you know what? There is some conversation that it could end up being like a television series or a Netflix.
I can see that. Like,
totally.
I would want to see it spread out. I mean, that's kind of the thing with Shaq too. It's like, oh my gosh, you just wanted it spread out. But that book, and what you did at the end, we won't say, but it's like what you did at the end, it was just like, oh my gosh. So yeah.
I know, but you could go deeply into like Maggie's character and Clarence's character.
So many different angles.
So
but
Abby.
That's amazing. Cause that was one of my questions, was because I can imagine just the pressure that most people would feel, that you obviously started to maybe feel or dance with a little bit of, here's this thing phenomenon, right? And then to be able to say, okay, what do you do next? Right? Like, what's that? What do you follow that up with? So that's incredible.
So it's been an easy journey. Eve was the hardest thing I've ever written, but that's because, to use a river metaphor, which I now use for creativity.
Yeah.
Shaq and Crossroads, I jumped into rivers that nobody else was in. I mean, there was just nobody. And so it was like, jump in the river, let the river take you wherever it takes you. Eve was jumping in a river where there was lots of boats and other people, you know, because I'm actually dealing with text, and I'm trying to write a work of fiction, putting 40 years of theological study into a work of fiction accessible to a teenager. And so that's why my main character ended up being a 16-year-old trafficked girl.
Yeah.
It's the only way I could do it. It's the only way I frankly thought it was impossible, but man, Eve was rough to write. It was a tough go, a lot of work.
And
I love it.
Like, as far as I know with the Shack, from what I understand, it was a number of pieces that you kind of wrote at different times, kind of come together. What is your process like? I know, Eric Ottervander, he was like, all right, how do you develop your characters? What's that like? Is it a guided prayer? Like how do you go about cultivating these stories?
I'm much more childlike than all of that stuff. If it gets too complicated, it's if it doesn't work for first century slaves and children, I think it's probably wrong.
Yeah.
so for the Shack, I started with the conversations, and
interesting,
because I didn't have a storyline, and because Kim had asked me, write something as a gift for my kids, and so I started by thinking like, well, I could do, words that mean something to your dad, like antinomianism and adultery and,
right.
And, but I'm going like, this would kill them.
Right. And then, okay, Dad, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, really. So then I started with just, well, what are my questions? And I started writing and I found out that I'm really good at writing conversations. In fact, that seems to be that's sort of my language with God, is inside conversation. And so the conversations took on a life of their own. So I'm going like, all right, I said, who's asking these questions and why?
Yeah.
And that's where Mackenzie showed up. And then from day one, Papa God was a large Black African-American woman. That was just, just
a lot of questions about that. A lot of people like, okay, when did that happen? Did that feel like a risk? Did you know that?
No, because I'm writing it for my 6 kids.
I know it impacted me, but other people, obviously that was a lot of controversy for some. Like,
my people.
How soon did you hit? And did you ever think, it's too much, I'm not going to do it?
No. I'm writing it for my kids. What have I got to lose?
Right. I suppose. Exactly. Right.
It turns out that God was writing it for his kids too.
Right. Totally.
So there wasn't any of that. And even when the backlash happened and stuff like that, that didn't bother me whatsoever. I'm thinking like, oh, we bunch of white folk, we need God to break through our little Gandalf with a bad attitude God motif,
Right.
And imagery has never defined God.
Right.
God is a rock, a strong tower, a shield. Those are not even living things. Right. And but God is a nursing mother in Isaiah, a woman who loses a coin. The Holy Spirit is Ruach, which is feminine. God is the breasted one, El Shaddai. God is a shepherd, a mother hen. You know, God is a father, but God's no more masculine than feminine, or vice versa.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that the Holy Spirit is referred to in the feminine term, pronoun, she, starting in verse 2 of Genesis, doesn't mean that the Holy Spirit is the female part of God.
Yeah.
Any more than God as Father is the male part of God, you know.
Right.
And so it was playing with imagery to try to break the box open some.
Yeah.
And
I think I heard you say once it was to offend the mind to reveal the heart, or something to that effect. Kind of that. Yeah.
And to sneak past the watchful dragons.
Right. Right.
To use Lewis.
Yeah.
So it's it was a way to just put it into a different reality. That, I mean, we're so locked into our own personal imagery anyway.
Yeah.
Something to shake it up. And for my kids, I'm trying to say, look, I want to tell you about the God who actually showed up and healed my heart, not the God I grew up with, because I grew up with the white, distant omni-being Zeus behind Jesus, you know.
Right. Right.
That Jesus came to save me from. And because that was our theology. So,
right.
So most of it, even my mom had a problem with it. So
really?
Oh yeah, she as soon as Papa, I mean, she heard about the shack from her doctor and her hairdresser before she heard it from me. And even when her doctor and hairdresser told her about it, she didn't tell them that she was related to me. She was like, she figured she'd better read it, so she tried. And when Papa came through the door as a large black African American woman, she just closed the book, picked up the phone, called my sister, and said, "Debbie, your brother is a heretic." And she meant it. And there's this wild story how she got past it. But
well, I love that story. Could you tell that story?
You want that story?
I want that story.
Oh,
yes.
my gosh.
So there's your mom. She's in Canada and she's reading this. Her son's a heretic. She doesn't agree with him at all, but something changes her mind. I love this story.
Yes. So this is phenomenal, and I'll try to cut it down for time purposes. But my mom was a nurse, and she entered nurses training in 1946 in Victoria, British Columbia, at the Victoria Jubilee Hospital. It was a training hospital, and it's a 3-year nurses program. She wanted to be a medical missionary, and so she'd been there 3 months. She said she got her little cap, you know. She said, "I looked cooler." Yeah. Looked cooler, but I didn't know anything. And a woman comes into the hospital and she's bleeding, and her chart shows that she had 5 late second trimester, early third trimester miscarriages in a row.
Oh, no.
And this is 1946. I mean, there's no NICU, no neonatal, and premature babies don't survive. And so she is 6.5 months pregnant with their 6th attempt to have a child. The church is praying. She's the wife of the senior pastor of the Anglican Church. Her name is Mrs. Munn. And she's bleeding. So the head of OB comes in, examines her, and says, "I'm sorry, we're going to have to take the baby," because her life was in danger.
Yeah. And
sets up an emergency C-section, grabs the head night nurse to assist him, and a student nurse who happened to be there to assist him to learn and to do the cleanup. My mom, 18 years old, single, German Baptist background, at a time where you hardly ever stood up to a man, let alone a doctor. And
right.
Doctors were now
nobody questions a doctor. Yeah.
No. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and doctors. And so, you know, she is pulled into a C-section, emergency C-section, in which the doctor delivers a 1-pound baby boy. Wow. And we have a picture of Houston Parker, who's our 3rd grandchild, born 4 pounds and a half an ounce. And I have a picture of his entire fist like this, with room to spare inside my son's wedding band.
Wow.
Right?
And
at
he's
4 pounds.
Oh my.
4 pounds, 4 times bigger than this little baby. Well, the doctor delivers this 1-pound baby. His whole body's the size of a stick of butter, and puts him in a kidney tray, hands him to my mother, and says, "It's not viable, dispose of it." Oh. Which means incinerator, because that's what you do with medical waste. And he goes back to finish the operation. My mother is like, "What do I do?" And so because she looks at his baby and he's still breathing. and the doctor is saying, put him in the incinerator. And she's praying. She's like, God, what do I do? What do I do? So because you can't countermand the doctor, you can't disobey.
No.
So she goes out to the service area and she's like, what do I do? Comes up with a plan. So she finds a washcloth and she wraps this little baby in the washcloth, because preemies of that size rarely make any noise, right? And she just wraps him up, puts him back in the kidney tray, walks back into the operating room and puts him up on top of the sterilization unit, because it's the only warm place in the room.
Right.
The doctor thinks that it's all been taken care of, no problem.
Nobody's going to mention this.
Yeah, yeah.
Nobody talks about this.
And my mom's thinking, well, the baby's going to die, but I'll just wait for the baby to die.
Yeah.
Then I'll obey the doctor. It's just a timing issue. And so the doctor leaves. The head nurse takes Mrs. Munn to post-op for recovery, and my mother's left to do the cleanup, which she does. The baby was delivered 8:30 p.m. May the 30th, 1946. At 9:30, my mother's finished all the cleanup, takes the baby, just holds him in the operating room, waiting for him to die so that she can obey the doctor. At 9:30, the doctor meets with the parents and tells them the bad news. I'm sorry. You had a son. He was not viable. He did not survive. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, and he's a member of their church.
Oh,
right?
my gosh.
And so now they are grieving the loss of their 6th child. I mean, it's just devastating. This is way after you can feel the baby kicking and everything.
Right.
So the doctor goes home. My mom's holding this baby, 10:30, 11:30, 12:30, 1:30 in the morning. My mother says to herself, I should probably tell someone about this, because the baby's not dying. So she calls the head nurse, and the head nurse's response is, we are in so much trouble.
Right.
And has to call the doctor. The doctor comes rushing in from home, and he is livid. And he rips into this 18-year-old insubordinate nurse wannabe. Who does she think she is? And just
I've already told the family, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So he says, you created this problem. You're now responsible for it. Don't you dare say anything to the parents. So code of silence is placed on this. My mother doesn't know what to do. So she takes the little baby up to the nursery, and they begin to, the nurses just adopt this little baby. And my mother and the nurses hold the baby around the clock, feed the baby with an eye dropper. And over the next 2 days, the baby loses 4 ounces, gets down to 12 ounces. Because preemies often lose weight.
Yeah.
But nobody thinks this baby is going to survive. It's just a matter of time, and he's losing weight. But then the baby starts to pick up weight, and it's been almost 3 days. And as the baby picks up weight, the doctor realizes this baby is not going to die quick. And so he has to say something to the parents.
Wow.
So he meets with the parents, and he says, we did not want to give you any false hope, because when your son was delivered, he truly wasn't viable. And even if he had survived or did survive, he'd have brain damage, and so many things go wrong. But due to the miracles of modern medicine, we've managed to keep him alive, but we don't expect him to survive. He doesn't say anything about what my mom did.
Right, yeah.
And
doctor saved the day again.
Yep. And in that moment, they didn't care. They had a son.
Right.
And that afternoon, Harold's father, who was the senior pastor of the Anglican Church, takes Harold in the palm of his hand and baptizes him with an eyedropper. Wow. And names him Harold, which means good news. Yeah, good news. Well, 2 weeks later, Mrs. Munn was sent home. 2 months later, little Harold went home to his parents in basically a shoebox. And 2 years later, my mom, along with all the other nurses who were in the nursery, get an invitation to Harold's 2nd birthday party. And they all go because they're curious about Harold. Meanwhile, the parents have been starting to ask the doctor in the hospital, like, what really happened here? There is this mystery about why 2 days, almost 3 days, And nobody says anything, code of silence. So my mother goes, and she says, we're looking around to try to figure out which of these little kids is Harold. And suddenly I spot him. I go, that's him. He's a little skinny, but running around just like a normal child. She says nothing. She graduates that year. moves to central Canada, goes to Bible school where she meets my dad. And they graduate. They take a little church up in the Peace River country, northern Alberta, where I am born. And then when I'm 10 months old, the three of us moved to the other side of the planet, to the highlands of New Guinea, where I grew up as a missionary kid. And we come back when I'm about 10. My dad becomes an itinerant pastor. I went to 13 schools before I graduated high school. I end up in northern British Columbia, graduating high school in Terrace. And my mother is working at the hospital. And this one day she finds an obituary for a Bishop Munn who had passed away. And she happened to be working with an Anglican nurse. And she says, "Did you happen to know Bishop Munn?" And the nurse says, "Well, actually, very, very well. I worked with him with the First Nations people, and amazing man." My mother's still not sure. "Did Bishop Munn ever have any children?" "Yes, one son, Harold." My mother says, "Do you happen to know where he is?" And this woman says, "Nope, lost track of him. Amazing young man, graduated early from college. Last I heard, he's a missionary teacher in West Africa." My mother still says nothing for 10 more years.
Oh my gosh.
10 years later, I'm 27, right? Harold's like 9 years older than me. I'm 27. I'm living in Portland, Oregon, married to Kim. We have a couple kids so far. And my mother reads another obituary. Guess who died? The doctor.
Oh.
Yeah, the doctor died. And now he's dead and he's not coming back.
Right.
So,
exactly.
So this is the first
We can
time.
talk.
I know, exactly. First time she tells us this story. Or my dad. My dad had never
gosh.
heard this. Code of silence. I mean, she's old
Right.
school all the way.
Boy, you
And,
can trust your mom.
Oh my gosh, yes. So, I mean, she won't even tell you the truth. So now that the doctor's dead, my mother decided she'd track Harold down, and she found him. He was now the senior pastor of the Anglican Church just down the road from where his father pastored in 1946 in Victoria. And my mother stews for like 6 months. Her issue is, how do I tell Harold the truth about his birth without him just thinking I'm looking for credit?
Right.
That's the dilemma.
Right.
So Christmas comes and she writes this beautiful letter. And it says, basically, it's a story of the coming of a son who would change the world. So she wraps up the story of the coming of Jesus into the coming of Harold, as a person who would change the world, and sends it off, right? Well, he's on the phone, like immediately going like, "We need to talk,"
Yeah, that's amazing.
So my parents meet Harold and his wife. His parents had both passed by this point. And my mother tells Harold the truth about his birth, and he's just absolutely blown away. And he says, we always knew there was a mystery, but nobody would ever tell us. Wow. And so, as you can imagine, my mother and Harold have become very close. Every time Harold would come through that part of British Columbia, he'd go out of his way to come visit my mom. And she kind of picked up this motherly role in his life, and so one day she's talking to him on the phone, and she says, "Harold, I got to talk to somebody about something. I have this son."
You're this son. Congratulations, Paul.
Thank you. And he wrote this book, and I'm having a problem with it. But I'm not even going to tell you what my problem is. I just needed to tell somebody that I was having a problem with it. And Harold says, "Well, Bernice, why don't you let me read it, and I'll tell you what I think." "Oh, would you do that?" So
Harold.
So I know. So Harold reads The Shack, and he sends me an email. "Hey, Paul, I read your book. I want you to know that I love everything about this book, but I think I know what your mom's struggling with. It's the imagery that you use for God the Father. Let me see if I can do something about that." So Harold blind copies me on an email to my mom and says, "Dear Bernice, I read Paul's book, and you need to know I love this book, but I think you're struggling with how he portrays God the Father. Let me tell you why that is so important to me." And he lays it out, not only inside his personal story, but he says, "Look, theologically, we've never thought of God as more masculine than feminine, not through the early church. We got it a little screwed up since then, but overall, the whole spectrum and gamut of masculinity and femininity originate in the Father and in the Son and in the Holy Spirit. And so in the oneness of God. And it's like, and then he says, and he's the one that said, look, imagery is a way, a facet through which to see a window, through which to see some element of the character and nature of God. I mean, even in humanity, we have 7+ billion people, and we only get a glimpse of the immense magnificence of the character of God, who can incarnate through this many human beings. Yeah. And it's still only a glimpse, right? So imagery doesn't define God. It's to help us see elements of the character and nature of God. And so my mom saved a 1-pound baby boy as an 18-year-old nurse wannabe in 1946, who decades later becomes the man who builds the bridge that she can walk across to her own son.
Wow. Wow.
And my mom, she passed away a year ago, New Year's Eve day.
Mm.
And two things. One is, before she passed, she wrote me an email. This is a woman who was a missionary, a pioneer missionary, who was a nurse, who was a pastor's wife, who was a German Baptist growing up. And it's the only time she referenced the shack in a note to me. And she said, I want you to know that reading the shack is the first time in my life I actually believed that God loved me.
Wow.
That's my mom. So at that point, who cares who doesn't like
exactly right.
and Harold and I did her memorial service together.
No kidding.
No kidding. And the last words that she said to me, and I was there, and she's looking across the room at me kind of funny, and I say, "What, Mom?" She goes, "You're my son. Who would have thought?" That's the last thing my mom said to me.
I love your mom. Oh,
I do too. You know what? And you know what? My friend Baxter Kruger, who wrote The Shack Revisited.
Oh, yeah.
We just did a conference together this last weekend, and his mom passed away Friday, right? Oh. And I was there when he got the call, and he's from Mississippi, and we were in Portland, Oregon. And I got to be there, and we just told stories. And then I said, "Hey, hey, Baxter. I said, I want to tell you something. Today, which is the day that his mom died. Yeah. Today is my mom's birthday."
No way.
Yeah. And I have this picture that for her birthday, she wanted to be a greeter at the pearly gates, So she was there. Bernice and Betty are now together. Baxter says, "Boy,
they're probably playing cards. They're having a blast."
No. Oh, they're talking about their renegade sons.
That's exactly right.
My mom knows me better now.
I love it. So here's the thing: is if people have read The Shack, I'm guessing again you ushered in a closer understanding to God. Maybe it caused some stirring. Maybe it caused some conversation.
Stirring's good.
Hear this. They hear that piece that I talked about. You get grace just differently than most people and at a deeper level. And you talk about that. I mean, I think one of the most important things you said was to say, with 15 copies, that was good. Like, expectations met, all of that. So let's just talk for just a second, because I think it'd be easy for someone to go, oh, well, you grew up in a religious or spiritual family. Probably always had this understanding, easy peasy, chicken greasy to get to this point. But the years leading up to you writing The Shack.
Sure.
Let's just talk about that for a second.
Let's talk about another layer of what The Shack means.
Yeah.
Let's talk about The Shack as the house on the inside that people help you build.
Yeah.
And a lot of us, we didn't get good help.
Right.
Just because you grew up in a religious family doesn't mean that things are well, as any religious person can tell you.
Right.
And so, part of my experience, my father, his capacity to be a father was destroyed by his father before I ever showed up. And he was just a violent disciplinarian. Mm-hmm. And so, I learned about the nature of the character of God the Father from my dad, who was willing to beat the hell out of his son to be right with other people. And then the sexual abuse that started in the mission field before 5, and then at 6 going to boarding school, and the big boys coming at night molesting the little boys. Yeah, no. Yeah. You cannot go there in my life and
Right.
say, right? So, I create all the survival mechanisms and skills that you use to stay safe. I am disassociated from my own heart. I drag that in as a performer. That's what I did. I became a performer. I built the facade instead of letting people in the shack.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the shack became the place I stored all my addictions and hid all my secrets and was terrified to let anybody into. And thank God I married the wrath of God, and which which I now believe is a very good thing.
Yeah. Right.
Right? Wrath of God used to terrify me because I thought it was against me. Oh,
Yeah.
get this. The early church had a view of God as judge, and we have a view of God as judge, but so many of us see God as judge in a forensic sense, in a courtroom sense.
Mm.
And the role of a judge in a courtroom is to adjudicate whether you are guilty or innocent. And if you are guilty, to sentence you to punishment, the supposedly equivalent to the amount of crime you've committed.
Right.
Right? But in the early church, they didn't see God as a judge in a courtroom at all. They saw God as a judge who is the great physician. And when you go to a doctor, who you want him to judge you,
Right.
you want him to tell you why you're sick and how you're broken, so that he can adjudicate a path toward wholeness and restoration and healing. But
Interesting.
both are judges, right?
Interesting.
But we've adopted so my view of God the Father was all screwed up inside
Yeah.
a forensic mentality. So, and I drug that into my marriage, and I broke the world at one point when I was exposed and had to learn how to live an authentic life and be a truth teller and take the risk of trust,
Yeah.
which, Mackenzie's weekend in the shack represents 11 years for me.
Yeah.
But I was trying to put 11 years worth of work into a weekend for my kids. But it's also significant that Mackenzie Allen Phillips, his name spells map. And
Mm.
Melissa Ann Phillips, the little girl, his daughter who was murdered, Melissa Ann Phillips spells map, because I'm both. I had a
Yeah.
writer from Nashville who said, I don't know who you are, but my sense is that Missy represents something murdered in you as a child, probably your
Wow.
innocence. And Mackenzie is you as an adult trying to deal with it. So nothing easy peasy about this. This is grace and desperation.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for the therapy and the people and the process, but I will not go through that again. It's like,
Work too hard for that.
oh
Yeah.
my goodness. You know what? But that's why I can say by the time I was 50 years old, I suddenly realized I'm one of the healthiest people that I know. I don't have any addictions. I
Yeah.
don't have any secrets. I'm the same person in every situation,
Yeah.
which I didn't know was possible. And
Especially when you're a performer. If you've lived most of
oh
your
my,
life as the performer, then you start to, like Mark Twain said, if you have no lies, you don't need a good memory, right?
yeah,
But if you're
exactly,
a performer, then you're like, wait, what kind of performer am I here? And what role was I in the
exactly.
last time I was here? Versus you just show up
Yep.
and you are who you are. And
So one of the survival skills is to hear God call you somewhere else. you
Yeah.
know, where you can try to start the facade over again and try to
Yeah.
keep the amount of information down to a minimum. But somebody always finds you out, and that's when you hear God hear you, call you somewhere else.
Wow.
But marriage really was the crucible for me because I couldn't easily run away,
Yeah.
and I just happened to marry a very powerful human being, and I'm part of why I'm as whole as I am today is the intensity of her fury
Yeah.
and the length of it.
Yeah.
And so she pushed me to deal with every piece of crap in society, And
Well, it's amazing because she really did. There was the fury, but it was also, there was the commitment, right? Like
well,
it's
she was committed to her fury. There's no question about
that's right.
that. So, but but the fact that she even let me stay in the house,
Right.
I mean, things like that. Those of you who don't know, I got caught in a 3-month affair with one of my wife's best friends, and that became the point of exposure where the choice was to either kill myself or do the work. You know, killing yourself is the last way to run away.
Yeah.
And I made the choice not to run away, but to face her. And yeah, life is really tough sometimes.
Yeah.
But a lot of us, you know, it takes fire to burn the stuff out of us that is not of love's kind.
Yeah.
And that's the commitment of a God who is a flaming fire of fury. But it is a fury of love. It's never against us, but it is against everything in us that is not of love's kind.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the shack comes out of that. And it's kind of almost a miracle that it would be Kim would be the one that says, someday I want you to write, because this is in the aftermath of all of that betrayal. But it took Kim and I 11 years to heal. 11 years before I could say, yes, she absolutely trusts me and she has every reason to.
Yeah.
You know,
which is amazing. And in so many ways, you know, like you said, for her to ask, but it almost had to be her to ask.
Yeah.
You know, that's incredible.
It is
so,
incredible.
All right, there's so many other questions and I can tell you, there's just so many people that, you know, poured out their hearts on impact of the book and all of those things. But I want to kind of jump to, because I want to respect your time, but I want to jump to a little bit of like what you're working on now. Cause you mentioned that a little bit before we hit record, and you got my brain has just been whirring ever since. So let's talk a little bit about what you're working on now.
Okay. So I'm working on a nonfiction and a fiction. The nonfiction will either be entitled, maybe, one of these two is the idea at the moment: The Art of Living in One Day's Grace, or God in the Present Tense, right? And that comes from the last 15, 20 years of learning how to live just inside the grace of one day. That is not with outcomes in mind, not making choices with outcomes in mind, responding to what's actually in front of me rather than trying to control some fear-based imagination of things that could go wrong that don't actually exist, right? Because I think a lot of us spend a whole bunch of time not being present. One of the markers when I turned 50 that I was so much more whole, not perfect, not finished, but big construction stuff had been done, is that joy became a constant companion. And joy is in the present tense. And in the presence is fullness of joy, right? And so when you don't experience joy, it usually means that you're not present. You're off in some fear-based future-tripping imagination. Or you've got some imagination of that which will give you identity, worth, value, significance, security. And now you've got a set of expectations, and now you're performing to that. Right. And so you live from the outside in rather than from the inside out.
Right. And so, that I think goes back to what you were talking about, is like 15 copies written and you're done.
And it wasn't even an expectation. I just knew when I hit those 15 and I saw the response that it did everything that I ever wanted it to do.
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't like 15 is the mark, you know?
Exactly. Right.
You know, it wasn't that I was shooting that low, you know? but part of living in the grace of the day is you no longer live according to expectations. When you take a word like expectancy, which is a moving verbal form, and you nounify a word and you push it to the outside, it then begins to judge you. Expectations are just disappointments waiting to happen. And when you live by them, you're drawing lines beneath which nothing's acceptable as a gift. You know, like the child who Christmas is coming, they're full of expectancy, but they really want this one thing.
Yeah.
You know, and you can give them the world, except if they don't get the one thing, the world doesn't even matter. And they've now moved from expectancy to expectation. And now that expectation judges the results out here and says, not worthy, right? Yeah. And so we do that to ourselves. So there's lots of things buried in all of that kind of conversation. But it takes trust to stay inside the grace of the day. It takes becoming childlike. And we have to change and become as children, or we can't even see the kingdom of God. But, you know, when you don't believe God is good, not at the core of your being, the only one you can trust, even though you might hate yourself, you're the only one that has your back. And so control becomes the only option to fear.
Yeah.
And that's it. Trust or control. That's it. how we deal with fear. And so that book wraps these kinds of conversations up. And yeah, pretty cool. Because they've been so meaningful to me. And I love living this way. I like living as a child. Being an adult's way too complicated and too much work. And I'm not going back to that. It's just like, So the fiction book is, and I thought I'd never do this, but I'm working on a sequel for The Shack.
Wow.
And I just thought, nope, that book stands alone by itself. It's good. And over the last 10 years, in the midst of conversations and everything else, and just how the unfolding of all this has happened, I've built a relationship with a bunch of guys on death row, Unit 2 in Tennessee. And suddenly I'm around people who are murderers, and I've got a storyline that involves a serial killer. And I dealt with the issue of forgiveness, but I didn't take it past that. Right. And it's like, okay, so how does then this play out? And how do you deal with justice and reconciliation and fury and evil and all of these kinds of things? So it's given me an arc and a storyline to pursue. So
but it's almost, I'm guessing you've almost needed that 12 years or more and all those experiences then to be able to, because I know you've said, but in the past, never a sequel, all that stuff, but it's that whole thing of that kind of context, those kinds of experiences. And the minute you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's gold. That's amazing. So what kind of timeline do you expect on them?
I have one of my friends is on death row, has a death date of April 12th, 2020.
Wow.
And I would like to have this out with a prayer that it might change some hearts in Tennessee. And we've already had some of the brothers executed, and some of them are the most freest, most beautiful people I've ever met. Seriously.
Yeah.
Their prison's obvious. All of us are wandering around in prisons that we don't even see.
Right.
And so I would like this. My goal, my hope is that I can have this out in some form before Abu gets executed in next April.
Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible. Well, we'll be praying for that too, and praying for the journey. That's incredible. It's needed, and just so love you, love what you do. You inspire me, my man.
Well, I'm loving what you do from afar. Yeah. I'm going to, go Mitch. Now, I know you married up too, so hi, Melissa.
There is no doubt. Yeah, you got to pray with my bride. You know what that's like. So absolutely, man. Well, I love you. I love what you do, and know that we're rooting for you throughout.
Thank you, bud. Blessings on you and on all of those who are part of your family there, and may your kind increase.
Thank you.